Okay, so the price of admission to the Maitland Museum of Art also gets you into. Oh, and I did ask a question. They do have artists in residence, and they also teach art here. So they have a lot of stuff going on. But getting back to what I was saying, so the I'd mentioned earlier that perhaps the artist was black, but that is not true. What is a fact, because I just did a quick overview of his stuff, is that he was very close friends with a lot of African American artists here. So he supported them, he worked with them, he painted them, which was, quite progressive for someone at that time. And here we have an old house that's occupied, actually. But yeah, I'm just so fascinated with this whole place. And I'm not surprised to see the phone museum because Bell South was big here. I actually worked for an answering service at one time here, and I used the old plug-in switchboard like, Ruth Buzzy with a one ringy dingy, two ringy dingy. Yeah, I actually did that. So I actually worked on the more advanced computerized systems too, but mainly on the old timey switchboard. So I'm going to imagine that we have some here. And so the price of admission over at the art museum gets you into the history museum here and the telephone museum. And of course, the park across the street is always open and free. Do y'all remember those? Pretty crazy. So now we're in the historical museum. So there's a lot to see here. I encourage you to come out. I'll show you a little bit of the telephone museum when we get in there too. I love that they're covering the indigenous history of this area a little bit. And even some photographs of Seminole Indians. So let's go and try and catch up with Chris. He tends to go through these very quickly, and I'm slow because I like detail. So let me get on it. It's interesting that people want to deny gay relationships ever existed until modern day. These two women did a lot to for the Audubon Society and everything. It was President Cleveland's sister. It was, it was a thing back then. But, probably as today, people didn't have as big an issue with two women being together as they do with two men being together. It's so hypocritical. But, yeah, I digress. So here's a painting by Jules Andre Smith, who started the artist colony next door. I love it. It really caught my eye, as did this etching. Well, I guess it's not an etching. And there's another Jules Andre Smith painting up there. It reminds me quite a bit of a painting I have called Outdoor Baptism. There's another watercolor that he did, watercolor on paper. I love the whimsical nature of this one. I'm glad we got to see some of his art. Because as I left the art center over there, I was like, hey, wait. They didn't have any of his art. That's because what they have is over here. Oh my goodness. We have literally stepped into the 70s and 60s here. Even down to the jealousy windows. That's funny. Like the homes I grew up in had these windows, and there would actually be a crank down here and you could open them up or close them. That's so funny. Oh yeah. We had that Tupperware. How many of you had Tupperware like this, or your grandmothers had Tupperware? Oh my goodness. The Phone Shop Game by United Telephone. That's funny. I was talking about this game. I don't know why I'd forgotten about it. But do y'all remember Stratego? Apparently it's still out there. I used to collect old toasters, but I loved the game Stratego. I've been tempted to buy it. So here's the kind of switchboard I worked on. Similar. You know, you'd pull these cords here and patch them in here, and that's how you would answer the call, and each one of these was a different number. The one I worked on was bigger. We'll go check that out next door and see if they have one as large as the one I worked on. I think he said this was the oldest one they had from the 40s. Yeah, but it was being used in the 60s because it even has notes on how to refer incoming calls. Oh, I remember that poster. Orlando Land, that magazine. Wow, that's crazy. But yeah, I don't collect. I quit collecting toasters and started collecting these fire what are they? They're like torches, basically. They're brass torches, and they all look different. So I started collecting those. I may still have some toasters and some of the brass torches. There's always something blooming in Florida. All right, this is established in 81. So what color did you have in your house? We had, I think, black, beige, and we may have gone as bold as yellow, if I recall correctly. But of course, you know, I would have wanted orange, red, or green. The lighter kind of aqua blue is kind of cool. This one. But yeah, I'll give you a quick glimpse of how we used to collect antique insulators over there too. I haven't seen any on a pole in maybe a decade. But I kind of have to go into the Appalachian Mountains to kind of find, the round phone. I had a round phone, but it was white, and they don't resell as well. When I was doing antique stuff, collecting. The guy at the front, this was his phone down here. This clear phone. But yeah. Of course, they have these really old ones too. But I was telling Chris, I still didn't find a switchboard like the one I worked on. But this would have been a commercial, like telephone company switchboard, because you also had to dial out. So those were the days when you had like 3 numbers and they'd be like, I need BR 502. And then you would find 502 here and you would take the cord and patch them into 502. Or if it was a different place, you could patch them to another exchange. I think down here are those other exchanges under these bigger ones. So this would be your incoming call from your local residents, and then you would dial whatever they tell you to dial. And in the exchange, like BR, PR, TR, whatever it was, even if it was a number base. And then, yeah. And then you had on and off to where you could listen to what was going on or not listen to what was going on. So if you wanted to, like, spy on your neighbor or your enemy, you could do that. But this is similar workout. Now we had a patch cord and it had a button in the middle for patching. So a doctor could call in on one of these lines and say that, hey, can you, I'd give him some test results or whatever, and he'd say, hey, can you patch me over to the hospital? And so I could then dial the hospital, and, you know, like I said, I could put him in touch with the hospital. As soon as I heard it ringing and that they were talking with each other, I would then turn it off so I would not hear the conversation on my headphone and go back to answering other calls. So I would say my worst switchboard was the one at the end, because it had a psychologist or a psychiatrist line there, and he had a very problematic, very needy patient, and so she would occupy a lot of my time and his time, and he'd tell me to just tell her to see me Monday. I'd like have to put her off, and she was really in distress, but I think she was just sad and lonely, to tell you the truth. So when I was telling the guy up front, when I worked in telecom, we would actually, so this is a cable, so they might call this whole cable coming out of the central office, they might call that, say, 501. So they'd have 101, 201, 202. And so then in that, then all of these pairs had a name. So it'd be 501 pair 1 to, I think these are 50 bundles. Bundles of 50, maybe it looks like. Could be 100. I'm going to guess 50. So then this would be 1 through 50. This would be 51 through 100, 101 through, and so on. And so then they would come out of the central office, and then like at your house, you see these little pedestals, and then the pedestals, they kind of come out and they branch out to individual homes, and that's how the wires are run. But we used to have to account for every single one of these suckers, and if they went into one of those big green boxes, that was a cross box. When they go into a cross box, they might change ID, and so you'll lose the 501 identity, and then it would become, I don't know, 704 pairs 1 through whatever. Even if it came in as 501, say 200 to 300, it would go into the cross box and come out as, say, L30, 1 through 200. So it kind of renumber the pairs again. It was fascinating. I loved doing that. And I was doing drawings, mainly converting, correcting, engineering drawings. I'd have to go pull engineering records. If, say, an engineer said it was a 200 pair cable, and they only accounted for, say, pairs 1 through 150, then I'd have to go pull records and find out what actually happened in construction, where those other 50 pairs, because you had to account for everything. So sometimes we worked backwards. We worked by they would have these old dot matrix, the old big green and white data of all the equipment that the phone company was supposed to have. And then we would also have to reconcile those records and make sure everything in those records were reconciled somehow, either that there was a new engineering job and those pairs went away, or the equipment went away, or whatever happened there. Or we'd have to, correct the record to reflect what was actually there. And that was converting old manual drawings, like here's an old drafting table that I would have worked at. And so and a light. So we would sit here and they would draw out their records. And then what we did was we took all the records, all the cables, all the poles, even down to the guy wire on a pole, and we turned those into computer database and graphics. So that was my job, and that's how I kind of got into wireless as an engineer, because working on these old ancient things to actually learning about cable and wiring. And this is what a typical I was telling Chris, this is what when I worked for major corporation, this is kind of what all the back rooms looked like. It would feed the local lines, and the everything, the alarm, everything was all wired up under this. A lot of times when stores got broken into, because I managed that too. I did 911, I did engineering of fiber and all kinds of stuff for a major corporation. So, but I also had to deal with the stores, and if we had a break-in, they generally would basically pull all these panels to cut the alarms and cameras and all that stuff. But, that never does any good, because they caught everyone that ever broke in. So I don't recommend it. And of course they do take donations here. So, all right, let's check out the next thing. I didn't notice this when I was out here the first. Oh, look, a bunny again. Bun. What I didn't notice when I first came out here is that he had this scarf, and they were called ascots. And the guys generally, too many of them didn't wear them very long. They had shorter, more like a bandana type, and they sold little rings, and you would put your ascot on and tie it with the ring would keep it around your neck well. And some guys wore them in the middle, some guys wore them to the side like that gentleman. So that's funny. I love that shirt though, it's pretty cool. And this is of course Cold War and atomic age, like safety precautions and supplies and survival supplies. Yeah, craziness. And there you go, radar scope. Radar Civil Defense Center. I guess that's what that was for. Of course, everybody should still have an emergency radio, whether it be weather or other. But yeah, hid under those desks a lot of times with our bomb drills. Ridiculousness. When I went to school here, when I graduated, to graduate, you had to have take a class on, it was called Americanism versus Communism, and it was a required course because, Florida's proximity to Cuba. We couldn't have any, converts to communism, and so they tried to teach us why it was bad and everything. So, very interesting times.